If you have ever read 1984 by George Orwell, you might recall the paradoxical slogans of Orwellian newspeak. War is peace, freedom is slavery, and ignorance is strength. This video discusses similar slogans made by the governments today. I want to begin with the first one. Higher taxes are lower taxes. Roughly 40% of our working time is spent to pay taxes to the US government. But if you ask almost anybody, do you get your money's worth? Almost nobody will say yes, except maybe a few government employees. Presidents and Congress always talk about tax cuts, yet nobody is really proposing a tax cut. All that is proposed is to shift taxes from one place to another. The Build Back Better plan, the increases in Social Security, the expansion of the Department of Energy. Each of these alone amount to more than the proposed tax cuts. In the second place, you have inflation, which inevitably drives your income to higher tax brackets and makes the purchasing power of your dollars lower. So not only you end up paying more taxes, but you also need to spend more money to buy the same goods. It is well documented that if your wages go up 10% and prices go up 10% due to inflation, on average your taxes will go up 15%. This is only half of the problem because the real tax on people is not only the payments taken away from their paychecks. The real tax is what government spends. If the government spends extra $3.5 trillion more than it collects in taxes, just like in 2020, who do you think pays for it? Santa Claus? You and I are paying for it. What the government officials are proposing is to collect less tax from income and shift it to the hidden tax called inflation that nobody needs to vote for, but everyone must bear. Because of these hidden taxes, the real taxes are actually higher than the already absurd budget proposed by the Biden administration. The second Newspeak slogan is, "There is no free lunch, but there are free taxes." There is a notion that somehow there are taxes on the business and there are taxes on the people. Not only Biden, but almost any other administration, Republican or Democratic, has said that they are not raising taxes on people, but raising taxes on businesses and corporations. The most obvious one is Social Security tax, half of which is said to be paid by the employer and half by the employee. What is forgotten is that the whole thing is actually paid by the employee, since from the employer perspective, this is just an additional cost of hiring a person. Additional costs that they will pay to the government and not to their employee who worked for it. But more fundamentally, only people can pay taxes. A business isn't a person. The money either comes from the customers, workers, or stockholders. Is there a way in which money can be collected without anybody paying? If the business must pay higher taxes to the government, that money is not available to cut the price to their customers or pay more to their employees or dividends to stockholders. So, all of these taxes on business are paid by people and nobody else. The third Newspeak slogan is, "What is yours is ours." The government will say, "We used tax money as a gift or loan to businesses and individuals." We saw a lot of that during this pandemic. This is a proposition that says, anything we don't take from you, we are giving you. It illustrates the notion that you belong to the government, and so does your income. But of course, like any slave owner, the government wants you to maintain productivity, so it has to leave you enough money for food, clothing, and little extra to keep you incentivized to work. That's the only justification for not having a tax of 100%. To summarize and refute the paradoxical slogans of today's governments, we must realize that taxes are measured by government spending and not tax receipts, that only people can pay taxes and not businesses or corporations, and that people belong to themselves and should decide how much to spend through government rather than giving the government the right to decide how much to spend. Now, people are often worried about the deficit, but they forget that it's much more favorable to have $2 trillion budget with $1 trillion deficit than a $6 trillion budget with no deficit, because it's twice more money taken away from the people. Imagine you spend more than you make in your own life. Your debt will either increase or your assets will shrink. The federal government has been having deficits for the last 20 years, yet its assets have increased and the debt is lower in real terms. It's a smaller fraction of the national income today than it was 20 years ago. How can that be? Doesn't that violate the laws of mathematics? The reason is hidden tax called inflation, which doesn't show up on the books but pays off the government debt. How exactly inflation does that and why is it a hidden tax is discussed in my inflation video, link in the description below. Lastly, we must ask, why is it that our tax system is infinitely complicated with rules and regulations, so much so that there is not a single person who could possibly know all of them? Nobody will argue that this is an equitable system. You can have two people in the same position that will pay very different taxes because of tax shelters and different unrelated accidental elements. One might say that it is to collect more revenue, but that is not true either. Imagine you were to replace every tax rate which is higher than 20% by 20%. So, someone who used to pay 40 or 50% will now pay 20. This would cut the tax expenses for people or businesses roughly by 10%. This would cut the amount spent on hiring expensive accountants and lawyers to set up tax shelters. This would eliminate the cost of decisions that are made on tax grounds, or decisions of not engaging in activities because it's just not worth it. There have been careful calculations made that the total revenue to the Treasury would go up and the cost to the taxpayer would go down in this scenario. So why are we not changing our tax system? Well, there are two groups of people who would be hurt from such change, and they are the reason the system will not change. The first one is obviously tax lawyers and accountants, but the second one is less obvious. It is the congressmen and congresswomen. They must make the system more complicated to receive benefits from the people who are willing to contribute to avoid the special burdens placed on them. Simplifying the tax system would make it very difficult for people in Congress to sell anything and for people in business to receive special interests. We must understand that it is not about electing the right people into the office. If me and you were in Congress, the situation would not be much different. We must make it politically profitable for the wrong people to do the right thing, and only then will we have the desired results. High government spending happens because we come up with many little pieces of programs and do our best for them to pass. The costs are spread out, but the benefits are concentrated. Over time, those costs add up, but the public has never voted for the total amount of spending. The only visible remedy for this problem is a constitutional amendment in a form of a limitation on the total government spending. This will create a situation where government officials are competing for a fixed pie for a fixed number of dollars rather than coming up with new programs and paying for them by printing money. Just like all of us have our individual budgets, and if we decide to spend more money on one thing, we often must cut the spending for something else. So, we must not waste time and energy on attacking one particular expenditure, but rather look at the issue as a whole and solve the problem fundamentally. I hope you are having a nice day. Feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel, and if you are ever feeling lonely and thinking that nobody cares about your existence, try not paying your taxes.